English translation, 434th contact. Saturday, 9th of September, 2006, 1957 hours.
Ah, you are already here, dear friend. Be welcome, Salome.
My greeting, my friend. Yes, for we have continuously been here for about 8 days because we carry out various measurements concerning climate change, which take up a lot of time.
Here in Switzerland?
In the entire European area, but this whole week, we were working in the area of Switzerland.
Aha. Is it possible that at the beginning of the week you may have circled around in the northeast of Switzerland and that perhaps you were seen by observers?
Some of us were in that area. And because certain clarifications had to be carried out without the visibility protection screens, it is possible that, perhaps, our flying apparatuses could be seen by observing persons.
That was probably the case because at least one person apparently saw one of your ships, as she reported to Bernadette.
That may be possible because, as I said, certain clarifications had to be carried out without the visibility protection screens.
Good. Then it is to be assumed that the person concerned has not exchanged any essential facts. But something else. With your last visit, you said that you would not let yourself wait for a long time in order to bring me new predictions. But now, the short time is already 3 weeks old.
It is just our different concepts of time.
According to the principle that if you say sometime soon, that could be in 3 months as well as in 3 years. But I already understand because the short lifespan for us humans here on Earth leads to different conceptions of time than what is the case with you, with your approximately 1,000-year-old life expectancy.
Therein lies the essential fact.
Like I just said. But what predictions do you have now, if I may ask for these first of all?
Your ideas will be stolen and be misused by the Vatican, as I have determined through a future review, namely for the first time on the Pope's trip to Germany.
You do not say, as if that was something new.
In this respect, it is new for Joseph Ratzinger, who let himself be elected as Pope, so perfidiously picks out things from your ideas, such that it is of use to him with his believers. The fact is that lately he holds to your policies in order to rally his faithful flock around himself. Lately, he will use your policy of non-missionizing, namely in the wise that he will preach that religious faith in God and in the Church must happen through freedom, respectively through the fact that the person must decide on the faith and the Church himself or herself out of their own free will, so thus without any compulsion existing for them. Thus, he steals your ideas and your policy that no missionizing and no compulsion should lead to the fact that a person turns to the teaching of the truth and the Spirit teaching, as well as the teaching of the life. For his part, he transforms everything connected to the faith and the Church, in order to preach at the same time that the rejecting of God, religion, and the Church, as well as the correction of all things, should correspond to no freedom in this respect. But contained in this is a hidden threat for all those who turn solely to the truth, with regard to the creation and its laws. If humanity, in today's time, was not already so far advanced in regards to the rationality and the intellect, then this Pope, with these religious fanatics and large cynics, would evoke a renewed inquisition.
That is clear and plain.
Also, our investigations that ended last week have yielded clarity with regard to the religiosity of the Earth humans, whereby only God religions are included in this, while Buddhism is excluded, however. Thus, outside of Buddhism, 82.7% of terrestrial humanity are caught up in a religious faith of the most diverse denominations and sects and, therefore, are no longer capable of using their own rationality and their own intellect in a clear manner, as well as using it independently and without bias. In our investigations, startling findings arose in that the great mass of these religious believers and sect believers of all persuasions, with their erroneous religious teaching, are always willing to yield to hatred and strife, and are also willing to advocate acts of revenge and retaliation, or even independently to exercise murder, manslaughter, war, and destruction. The paradox here is that, once again, the majority of these humans do not wish for murder, manslaughter, war, or destruction, yet in this connection everything is endorsed. Nevertheless, if the religions and state power call for it, or if it allegedly serves for their security. In contrast, 17.3% are those who do not belong to any religious persuasion, but who are freethinkers or who are devoted to teaching the truth. But of these, 1.9% indulge themselves in complete indifference to all matters of world events and ideologies, etc. The remaining 15.4% are those who, on the whole, consciously or unconsciously, follow the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the life, and with this, the guidelines of the teaching of the Spirit, and with this, the creational natural laws. Thus, it proves itself clearly and irrefutably that religious faith bears a lot of guilt for all the miseries and evils that are widespread among all of humanity, and that will continue to spread. If the Earth humans would voluntarily turn from out of their own volition, without compulsion, and without being converted, but rather out of clear rationality and a clear understanding of the real teaching of the truth, the Spirit teaching, aka creation energy teaching, and the teaching of the life, as this is in your and the Figu members' mission, then they would change themselves to the true life and to the true lifestyle. This would mean that real love would originate among the Earth humans, as well as inner and outer peace, freedom, and harmony, like what you teach. Through this, all bad evils of strife, murder and manslaughter, hatred, torture and capital punishment, as well as revenge, retaliation, jealousy, war, and destruction would gradually disappear, and overpopulation and environmental degradation, along with many other ills, would also find an end. However, this will only be able to become a reality if all religions are frowned upon and are dissolved, because for as long as these still exist to such an extent as they do today, all the evils of the world, as well as death, destruction, and corruption, will continue to keep a plentiful harvest. And there is even the danger that through the fanatical religious machinations of the cynic Ratzinger, the percentage of the religious believers will climb again, especially through the youths whom he seduced and who are simple-minded and unknowing with respect to the real truth concerning the creation and the creational natural laws. The whole thing arises from your teaching policy, which was stolen from you by the Vatican, namely that no person shall be missionized to the truth, but, instead, should find the way to this out of their own interest and in their complete freedom, because from this, the Pope, in his fanaticism and cynicism, as well as in his cold calculation, has used your words in such a wise that each person, through their own freedom, should find their way to the faith, as I already explained. He now returns to the old, traditional conduct of the Vatican and the papacy, which, since the existence of Catholicism, made so-called heathens, etc., believing Catholics through bloody mission work, while further pursuing, as a paradox, that freedom by which faith should come into being through missionizing, through which a conversion to the faith by compulsion must be exerted upon the person once again. This represents an extremely cynical, calculating, self-glorifying, and perfidious manner of acting, as it can only come to the mind of a person who has unscrupulously, irresponsibly, and uncompromisingly run himself or herself into a pathological religious sectarian fanaticism. In addition to that, Ratzinger using your teaching and remodeling them to his advantage, he is also never afraid to attack Islam publicly, with regard to the Prophet Muhammad, in a more offensive and disgraceful manner, which will cause many Muslim men and women to riot worldwide. In his power and in his megalomania, he believes himself to be a divinely ordained glory and a divine broadsword over all other religions, whereby in his fanaticism he believes that he can achieve all that he wants. Thus, he slanders the Prophet Muhammad publicly, whereby he stirs up the hidden enmity between the Christian and Islamic religions, even more than this has already been since time immemorial. And of course, this fact will be vehemently challenged and be denied again, even though his words will be broadcast worldwide over the television and will exist for millions of witnesses. The Vatican and all the Pope's vassals will want to draw the attention of the entire Islamic religion, which is slandered by Ratzinger through various lies, to other, non-aggressive, non-reviling, and non-insulting forms, which they will not succeed in doing. However, because the Muslim men and women all over the world will feel rightly insulted, for the defamations and insults of the Prophet by Ratzinger will not be easily accepted. In fact, everything that comes from the mouth of the Pope will hit much worse than if everything was said by a simple-minded Christian, without rank and name. Ratzinger's religious and sectarian fanaticism will create new and not lightly increasing differences between Islam and Christianity, as a result of his stupid and reprehensible statements, but the cynic in his deluded belief is not able to grasp this. But ultimately, he will have to deal with the fear and undertake the hypocritical attempt, in order to allegedly search for conciliatory dialogues with Islam, as well as to settle his wrongdoings with untruths via his vassals. If he still recognizes, nevertheless, what he has caused with his insults that were made in hatred and with his threats toward the Islamic believers.
The fact that this Ratzinger mimics my words does not surprise me, because I assume that in the Vatican, our Figu website is diligently scoured and everything is stolen, which is useful for the redcoats, the blackcoats, and for the knowing heinous one on Peter's chair, a chair that has never existed anyway because Peter was never Pope. Indeed, the Pope's existence itself only originated much later, quite contrary to the false assertions in the made-up chronicle of the Pope and Vatican history. And that he openly rails against Muhammad in his delusion. This typically indicates his erroneous belief that he himself is the divinely appointed glory.
A fact that is very well known in the Vatican but which is vehemently denied. Yet that is not surprising when one considers that the entire chronicle of the Pope and the Vatican is full of lies, fraud, and intrigues, as well as full of fornication, murder, manslaughter, and massacre. In fact, there exists no other religion on the earth in which so many capital crimes were likewise committed in the name of an imaginary God and religious faith as with Catholic Christianity. And actually, this religious Christianity must basically be designated as the Pope's religion and the Vatican's religion, because since time immemorial, the papacy and its associated vassals, such as bishops and cardinals, etc., have formed the Christian sect into a religion for their own benefit, which merely pretends to embody a Christianity. For in truth, this religion embodies a glorification of the Pope and those who gather as bishops and cardinals around his glory and around God's representative. Along with this Pope's religion is solely about power, namely about a power that should control the world and that should turn off everything in the world that is not appropriate for the Pope and the Vatican. However, this kind of might delusion and the efforts toward obtaining world domination are just as perfidious as the kind and wise that is practiced by the USA, which is also striving for world domination but with an evil force of arms. If such a force of arms would also be possible for the Pope Ratzinger, however, then he, along with the raising of a new Inquisition, would not shy away from satisfying his religious fanaticism as well as his cynicism and might delusion through a worldwide religious war.
Frightening. But it is not to be changed. At least not for as long as human beings do not come to their senses and do not recognize the truth of the real machinations of the Pope and the Vatican, as well as all religious vassals. But what also has to be said has reference not only to Catholicism, but also to other religions and sects. But I would like to omit Buddhism in this respect, with regard to religious war effort, revenge, retaliation, punishment, and the like, as all such evils are given in all other religions and sects. Although Buddhism also contains erroneous teachings, but just not in the aforementioned wise. For the Buddhists' erroneous teachings refer to spiritual and consciousness-related interests, etc., which have nothing to do with war, hatred, revenge, punishment, and retaliation, etc.
That is correct.
Then another subject. During the last few years, nanotechnology was very far developed on the Earth, whereby more and more various nanomaterials find their use in all kinds of things that are used every day. In addition, you once said that nanoparticles are health hazardous to the humans. What must one understand by this?
Nanoparticles of various kinds are extremely harmful to health if they enter into the respiratory organs and thus into the lungs. In particular, this can happen via fabric and other materials that are treated with nanoparticles and that break away from the materials and float through the air, after which they are inhaled by the human beings. However, this inhaling of nanoparticles is in no wise harmless because they are so detrimental to the health of the human organism, as this is the case, for example, with asbestos particles, which also cause life-threatening diseases. This is a fact that, unfortunately, has not yet been recognized by the earthly scientists and which can cause serious, health-impairing consequences for many people if the facts are not recognized soon and countermeasures are taken.
That will probably still take its time, even if we distribute your warning worldwide. On the one hand, our scientists are severely narrow-minded, and on the other hand, an economic commerce has already been behind everything, such that the matter is still too difficult to stop. But many other things also are not to be stopped, as for example global warming, environmental degradation, and overpopulation, from which vast changes in nature take place. The deforestation of the rainforests and the building on the lands and also the laying of concrete and the asphalting of large surfaces contribute to the rapidly progressing climatic changes, as well as the large rainfalls resulting from it, concerning which Sim Yase already said in the late 1970s that Europe slowly becomes marshy.
That is, unfortunately, an irrefutable fact, because the Earth humans would not listen to the warnings and still do not hear them. Other climatic changes will develop not only through the environmental pollution, but also through the resulting surface changes of the Earth and the exploitation of the Earth's resources and, like you said, also from the general deforestation of forests and the laying of concrete and the obstruction of the land, especially the green areas. And concerning the marshiness of Europe, it is to be said that the problem of the unusually large and heavy rainfalls will create new factors of climate change, because through this, the temperatures will change drastically. Thus, all of nature will change, not only the vegetation, but also the world and the physical characteristics, etc., of the creatures and of the humans. Extreme snow and hailstorms, and just as extreme periods of heat and drought will alternate themselves, whereby the glaciers as well as the Arctic and Antarctic will also be affected and will melt. Heavier and heavier rains will cause more and more mudslides, landslides, and rock slides, whereby also the thawing of the permafrost, which holds the rocks together, will play an important role. Thus, through the warming of Earth's climate, the waters of the seas will rise, which will mean that cities, villages, and populated areas of land will be unstoppably inundated and will become uninhabitable for the Earth humans. Through this, the inhabitable areas become smaller and smaller, which means that the living space of the Earth humans will shrink more and more and become smaller, namely in relation to the steadily growing overpopulation. Thus, a human catastrophe is already predetermined, which can only be stopped in its worst forms by a rigorous birth control, respectively by a worldwide birth stop, controlled step by step in a certain way over a long period of time. But what has already been destroyed by the Earth humans in nature and in the climate, in relation to overpopulation and its devastating effects, can no longer be reversed. Unfortunately, so the increasing natural disasters of every kind become more and more normal in the coming time.
Then once again, we have discussed things that should actually be quickly disseminated to the public. What do you think? Should I perhaps make a special bulletin out of this conversation?
You should realize your idea because what we have discussed is of great significance for the Earth humans. But since you already mentioned it, I would like to include a suggestion concerning the bulletins. It would be of enormous importance for the mission if you would chronologically group all bulletins, since the issue of the first copy, in book format. I am thinking of a format like that of the new contact report blocks. Also, all small writings should gradually be grouped together and be organized into books according to subjects.
Man, that will require a lot of effort, work, and above all, money, which we do not possess.
It should not be a work done overnight, but it should just be done gradually. By the way, how far have both works of Piero progressed? The one with the collection of articles out of the Aquarian age, and the one with the newspaper articles?
There, I have no idea, unfortunately. But I would gladly like to ask him.
That will be good because these works also need to be distributed.
Then I would still like to discuss some personal things with you, if you still have time.
I am not in a hurry.
Then the following.